The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their suburban Chicago home, casting golden rays across the marble kitchen countertops. Emily Martinez stood at the espresso machine, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling slightly as she prepared 2 cups of coffee. At 34, she had mastered the art of appearing composed even when her world was crumbling beneath her feet. "Morning, babe," David called out as he descended the staircase, adjusting his Armani tie. Even at 36, her husband carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed the universe owed him everything he desired. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, and his smile, once the thing that made her heart skip, now felt as cold as winter wind off Lake Michigan. "Coffee's ready," Emily replied, forcing brightness into her voice as she handed him the steaming cup. Their fingers brushed momentarily, and she noticed how he immediately pulled away, as if her touch burned him. David took a sip and glanced at his Rolex, an anniversary gift Emily had bought him 2 years ago with money borrowed against her business credit line. "I'll be late tonight. Big client dinner." Emily nodded, swallowing the words she really wanted to say. Another late night. Another mysterious client dinner. Another evening spent alone in their 5-bedroom house that felt more like a museum than a home. "Which client?" she asked casually, wiping down the already spotless granite surface. "Henderson Group. You wouldn't know them." His tone was dismissive, final, the same tone he'd been using for months whenever she asked about his work, his schedule, his life that seemed increasingly separate from hers. Emily watched him grab his leather briefcase, another gift she'd financed through her struggling marketing consultancy. As the front door clicked shut behind him, she finally allowed her shoulders to sag. The performance was exhausting. She walked to her home office, a converted den that had become her sanctuary and her prison. The walls were lined with awards from her marketing firm, Martinez Creative Solutions. But lately, those accolades felt like mockeries. Her business, once thriving, had been bleeding money for 2 years, as she desperately tried to maintain their lifestyle, while David's law practice went through what he called temporary setbacks. Emily opened her laptop and stared at the screen that haunted her dreams. A spreadsheet titled Financial Reality. The numbers glowed like accusations in the morning light. Business credit cards, 78,000, personal credit cards, 45,000, home equity line of credit, 120,000 business loan, 95,000, her personal savings loan to cover David's car payments, 23,000, total hidden debt, 361,000 for 2 years. She had been the financial magician behind their perfect life. While David believed their joint account showed healthy savings and their lifestyle reflected success, Emily had been quietly drowning, taking on debt after debt to maintain the illusion. Every dinner at expensive restaurants, every weekend trip to their lake house in Wisconsin, every designer suit in David's closet, all financed by her silent sacrifice. The irony wasn't lost on her. David was a divorce attorney who specialized in high-asset cases, yet he remained completely oblivious to their true financial situation. He saw the deposits Emily made to their joint account from her business, but never questioned why those amounts had been decreasing steadily. He never asked about the stack of mail she quickly sorted each day, pulling out the credit card statements and business loan notices before he could see them. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Sarah. "Lunch today? You've been MIA lately, and I'm worried." Emily stared at the message. Sarah, her college roommate turned successful architect, had been trying to reconnect for weeks. But how could Emily explain that she couldn't afford lunch at their usual spot? That she'd been surviving on credit for so long that even a $30 meal felt like a luxury she couldn't justify? Instead, she typed back, "Rain check? Swamped with a new client project." Another lie. Her client list had shrunk to 3 small businesses, barely generating enough revenue to cover her office rent and employee salaries. She'd had to let go of 2 staff members last month, claiming it was strategic restructuring, when really, it was financial desperation. Emily closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen, where she began preparing David's favorite dinner, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables. Cooking had become her meditation, the one thing that still felt genuine in her life of carefully constructed deceptions. As she seasoned the fish, her mind wandered to the early days of their marriage. 10 years ago, they'd been different people. David was a passionate young lawyer with dreams of making a difference, and Emily was building her marketing business from their tiny apartment. They'd shared dreams, supported each other's ambitions, and genuinely enjoyed each other's company. They'd talk for hours about their future, the family they'd build, the adventures they'd share. But somewhere along the way, success had changed them. Or rather, it had changed David. The more their lifestyle improved, the more he seemed to expect, from life, from her. He'd grown accustomed to the finer things, never questioning how they could afford them on his inconsistent income. He'd started taking credit for their joint success, introducing Emily at parties as "my wife who has a little marketing business," while describing his own career as if he were already a partner at his firm. The front door slammed, jolting Emily from her thoughts. She glanced at the clock, 4:30 p.m. David never came home this early. "Emily!" His voice boomed through the house, sharp with an edge she hadn't heard before. "We need to talk. Now." She found him in the living room, his usually perfect appearance, disheveled. His tie was loosened, his hair mussed, and his face carried an expression she couldn't quite read. Anger mixed with something that looked almost like panic. "Sit down," he commanded, gesturing to the cream-colored sofa they'd bought last year with her business credit card. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, her heart beginning to race. Had he found out about the debt? Had one of the creditors called him directly? David began pacing in front of their stone fireplace, his hands running through his hair. "This isn't working, Emily. Us. It hasn't been working for a long time." The words hit her like ice water. Not the debt. Something worse. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, though part of her had been expecting this conversation for months. "I've been thinking about this for a while. We've grown apart. We want different things. We've become different people." He stopped pacing and looked directly at her, his brown eyes cold and distant. "I think we should separate." Emily's world tilted. After 10 years of marriage, after all her sacrifices, after carrying their financial burden in silence while he lived obliviously in luxury, he was abandoning ship. Is there someone else? The question escaped before she could stop it. David's jaw tightened. This isn't about anyone else. This is about us, about how we've grown apart. But his eyes shifted away as he spoke. And Emily knew. Somewhere in her heart, she'd known for months. The late nights, the mysterious dinners, the way he pulled away from her touch. There was someone else, and that someone had finally given him the courage to blow up their life. "I want to handle this fairly," David continued, his lawyer voice taking over. "Split everything 50-50. The house, the savings, your business assets, clean and simple." Emily stared at him, speechless. Fair? He wanted to split everything fairly? After 10 years of her carrying him financially, after 2 years of her drowning in debt to maintain his lifestyle, after months of him clearly having an affair, he wanted fairness? "I've already spoken to Tom Henderson about representing me," David continued. "He's going to make sure everything is handled properly." Henderson. The same name he'd mentioned as his client dinner. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. There was no client dinner. There had probably never been client dinners. Tom Henderson wasn't just his lawyer. He was probably the husband of whoever David was sleeping with. "Emily, did you hear me?" David's voice seemed to come from far away. She looked up at him. This man she'd loved, supported, and sacrificed for. "Yes," she said quietly. I heard you. Good. I'm going to stay at Tom's place while we figure things out. I'll be back tomorrow to get some clothes. He moved toward the stairs, then paused. And Emily? I know this is hard, but let's try to keep this civilized. We're both adults. Civilized. He wanted civilized. As she heard his footsteps on the stairs above, Emily sat in the perfect living room of their perfect house, surrounded by the perfect life she'd built on a foundation of debt and sacrifice. For the first time in 2 years, she began to smile. David wanted half of everything. She was going to give him exactly what he asked for. After all, fair was fair. The house felt different the morning after David left. Quieter, but not in the oppressive way Emily had grown accustomed to. This silence felt liberating, like the pause between lightning and thunder, full of potential energy. Emily sat at the kitchen island with her laptop, coffee, and a legal pad. For the first time in months, she wasn't hiding financial documents or jumping every time she heard footsteps. The spreadsheet was open, the numbers staring back at her like old friends, rather than enemies. $361,000 in hidden debt. 10 years of marriage. 2 years of financial sacrifice. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized but never had the courage to call. Martinez Creative Solutions. This is Janet. Her assistant's cheerful voice was a balm to Emily's frayed nerves. Janet, it's Emily. Can you clear my schedule today? I need to handle some personal matters. Of course. Is everything all right? Emily paused, looking around the pristine kitchen that had been her stage for so many performances. Actually, I think it's going to be. Her next call was harder. Sarah picked up on the second ring. Em, please tell me you're finally free for that lunch. Sarah, I need to tell you something. And I need your help. 2 hours later, Sarah sat across from Emily at a small cafe in Lincoln Park, her architect's mind already working through the implications of everything Emily had just revealed. Let me get this straight, Sarah said, stirring her latte with more force than necessary. You've been carrying over $300,000 in debt for 2 years to maintain his lifestyle. He's been having an affair, and now he wants to split everything 50-50? That's the situation. And you're smiling about it. Emily's grin widened. I'm more than smiling. I'm strategizing. Sarah leaned forward. Okay, I'm listening. David thinks he knows what everything means. He sees the house, the joint savings account, what he thinks are my business assets. He has no idea about the debt because I've been managing it all separately. In his mind, he's about to walk away with half of a very comfortable life. But legally, marital debt is shared responsibility, especially when it was incurred to maintain the marital lifestyle. David's own specialty is high-asset divorce cases. He knows this better than anyone, but he's so focused on what he thinks he's getting that he's not considering what else he might be inheriting. Sarah's eyes lit up with understanding. You're going to give him exactly what he asked for. Every penny of it. That afternoon, Emily made another call she'd been avoiding. She dialed the number for Rebecca Chen, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Chicago, and David's biggest professional rival. Rebecca, this is Emily Martinez. I believe you know my husband, David. Rebecca's laugh was sharp as a blade. Emily Martinez. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Word travels fast in our circles. I heard David retained Tom Henderson. Then you know why I'm calling. I do. And I have to say, this is going to be the most satisfying case I've taken in years. When can you come in? Emily looked around the house that had been her prison and her stage. How about right now? Rebecca Chen's office occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise, with windows overlooking the Illinois River. At 45, Rebecca had earned her reputation destroying the careers of men who underestimated women in divorce proceedings. Her office walls were lined with law degrees, awards, and what Emily suspected were the metaphorical scalps of overconfident husbands. Before we begin, Rebecca said, settling behind her mahogany desk. I need to understand your goals. Some clients want revenge. Others want protection. Some want both. What do you want, Emily? Emily considered the question. 2 days ago, she might have said she wanted her marriage back. Yesterday, she might have said she wanted to hurt David the way he'd hurt her. But now, sitting in this office with the city sprawling below them, she realized what she truly wanted. I want justice, and I want my life back. Good. Those are goals I can work with. Rebecca opened a thick folder. Now, let's talk about what David doesn't know he's asking for. For the next 3 hours, Emily laid out the complete financial picture. Every credit card, every loan, every piece of debt she'd taken on to maintain their lifestyle, while David's income fluctuated and eventually dwindled. Rebecca's paralegal documented everything, creating a comprehensive map of Emily's hidden financial sacrifice. This is remarkable, Rebecca said finally. You've essentially been the sole financial support for your household for 2 years, while he believed he was living off joint success. The debt-to-asset ratio is going to be a shock. What's our strongest argument? That every piece of this debt was incurred for marital benefit. The home equity line of credit went to renovations he requested. The credit cards paid for the lifestyle he demanded. Your business loans covered his car payments, his clothing, his entertainment. In the eyes of the court, this isn't your debt. It's marital debt incurred to maintain the standard of living he expected. Emily felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years. Hope mixed with righteous anger. So when he asks for half of everything, he gets half of everything, assets and liabilities. The law doesn't discriminate. Rebecca's smile was predatory. And here's the beautiful part. He's representing himself through Tom Henderson, who specializes in protecting assets, not uncovering hidden liabilities. They're going to walk into this focused on what they want to take, never considering what they might be forced to accept. That evening, Emily stood in her kitchen preparing dinner for one. The ritual felt different now. Lighter, more purposeful. She wasn't cooking to maintain a facade, or please someone who had already mentally left their marriage. She was cooking because she enjoyed it, because it nourished her, because it was hers to choose. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Coming by tomorrow morning to get some clothes. Please make sure you're not there. This doesn't need to be awkward. Emily read the message twice, then typed back, I'll be out. Take what you need. But she wouldn't be out. She'd be in her office, on a conference call with Rebecca, finalizing the paperwork that would change both their lives forever. As she ate her dinner, a simple pasta dish she'd never made because David claimed to hate Italian food, Emily reflected on the transformation happening inside her. For 2 years, she'd been drowning quietly, sacrificing herself to maintain an illusion. For 10 years before that, she'd been slowly disappearing, molding herself to fit David's vision of the perfect wife for his perfect life. But David had made a critical error. He'd assumed that Emily's silence meant acceptance, that her sacrifice meant weakness. He'd mistaken her love for stupidity and her loyalty for naivety. Tomorrow, he would learn the difference. Emily opened her laptop and began typing. If she was going to rebuild her life, she needed to start with the truth. Not just the legal truth Rebecca would present in court, but the personal truth she'd been hiding from herself. She started a document titled The Real Story and began to write, For 2 years, I carried the weight of our marriage alone. I took on debt to preserve his pride, sacrificed my business to maintain his lifestyle, and slowly erased myself to keep him comfortable. I told myself this was love, but it was fear. Fear of confronting the truth about who we'd become. Fear of demanding better for myself. Fear of admitting that the man I married had become someone I no longer recognized. But fear, I've learned, is just another debt. And like all debts, It accumulates interest until it becomes unbearable. David taught me something valuable in these final weeks. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst impulses. Sometimes fairness means giving someone exactly what they ask for, even when they don't understand what they're asking for. Tomorrow begins the process of balancing the books, not just financially, but emotionally, spiritually, personally. I'm going to give David exactly half of everything we built together. Every asset, every liability, every consequence of every choice we made as a couple. And then I'm going to rebuild my life on a foundation of truth instead of debt. Emily saved the document and closed the laptop. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end of her marriage, but it felt like the beginning of everything else. Outside, Chicago glittered in the darkness, full of possibilities she'd forgotten existed. For the first time in years, Emily fell asleep, without calculating debt payments or planning financial magic tricks. She dreamed of balance sheets where both sides were finally equal. The morning David came to collect his belongings, Emily sat in her office listening to his footsteps above. Each creak of the floorboard marked another piece of their shared history being packed away. She'd timed her conference call with Rebecca perfectly. David's attorney appointment with Tom Henderson was at 10, giving them the ideal window to file their response. "Are you ready for this, Emily?" Rebecca's voice crackled through the phone speaker. Emily watched through her office window as David loaded boxes into his BMW, the car whose payments she'd been covering for 18 months. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." "Good. Because once we file this response, there's no going back. Tom Henderson is going to call David within an hour of receiving our documentation, and David's world is going to implode." Emily heard the front door close, followed by the sound of David's car starting. "He just left. File it. Consider it done. Emily, you might want to clear your schedule for this afternoon. Based on my experience with men like your husband, the next few hours are going to be eventful." 2 hours later, Emily was organizing her home office when her phone exploded with calls. David. David. David again. She let them all go to voicemail, focusing instead on the task of separating her legitimate business documents from the stack of bills and statements she'd been hiding. The fourth call came from a number she didn't recognize. "Emily, this is Tom Henderson. I think we need to talk." "Mr. Henderson, I wondered when I'd hear from you." Emily's voice was steady, professional. "I assume you've received Rebecca Chen's filing?" "Emily, I think there's been some kind of mistake. The financial disclosure your attorney submitted, it can't be accurate. Every number is documented and verified. I have 2 years of statements, receipts, and correspondence to support every item." A long pause. "Emily, are you saying that you've been carrying over $300,000 in debt without David's knowledge?" "I'm saying that I've been carrying over $300,000 in marital debt incurred to maintain the lifestyle David expected, while his income became insufficient to support our standard of living." Another pause, longer this time. "Emily, David had no idea." "Mr. Henderson, with respect, David's awareness or lack thereof doesn't change the legal reality. This debt was incurred during the marriage for the benefit of the marital household. Under Illinois law, that makes it marital debt subject to equitable distribution. But Emily, if we divide this debt equally, David would be responsible for over $180,000. He doesn't have that kind of liquidity." Emily allowed herself a small smile. "I'm sure he'll figure something out. After all, he's been telling everyone for years how successful his practice has become." When she hung up, Emily felt a satisfaction she hadn't experienced in months. The truth was finally out in the open, and the consequences were beginning to unfold, exactly as Rebecca had predicted. Her phone rang again. This time it was David, and his voicemail was barely coherent. "Emily, what the hell is going on? Call me back immediately. We need to talk about this mistake in the paperwork. Call me." The next voicemail was calmer but more menacing. Emily, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but this stops now. I'm coming over tonight and we're going to straighten this out. The third message was different entirely. Please, can we just talk? I don't understand how this happened. I thought we were doing okay financially. Please call me back. But Emily wasn't ready to talk to David yet. Instead, she called someone she should have reached out to months ago. Martinez Creative Solutions. This is Janet. Janet, it's Emily. Can you come in today? I need to discuss some changes to the business structure. Of course. Is 2 o'clock okay? Perfect. And Janet, bring coffee. We're going to be planning the future. That afternoon, Emily sat across from Janet in her office for the first time in weeks, without the weight of hidden financial crisis pressing down on her shoulders. Janet, at 26, had been with the company for 3 years and had watched Emily's growing stress with concern she'd been too professional to voice. Janet, I need to be honest with you about what's been happening, Emily began. My marriage is ending, and my business has been struggling because I've been using company resources to support my personal life. That's going to change. Janet's relief was visible. Emily, I was wondering why you'd been so stressed. The company used to be your passion. It still is. But I lost sight of that while I was trying to save something that was already broken. Emily pulled out a business plan she'd been working on since her meeting with Rebecca. I want to show you something. What would you think about restructuring the company? Smaller client base, higher value projects, more selective about who we work with? For the next hour, they discussed a leaner, more focused version of Martinez Creative Solutions. Emily realized that carrying David's financial burden had forced her to take on clients she didn't enjoy working with and projects that didn't utilize her strengths. Without that pressure, she could return to what had made her business successful in the first place: innovative marketing strategies for companies she believed in. There's something else, Emily said as their meeting concluded. I'm going to be dividing my business assets as part of the divorce settlement. But here's what David doesn't understand about this business. The real value isn't in the equipment or the client contracts. It's in the relationships, the reputation, and the creative vision. Those things can't be divided. Janet grinned. So he gets half of the assets, but none of the ability to use them? Exactly. He'll own half of computers and office furniture. I'll own the relationships that generate revenue. At 6 o'clock, Emily heard David's car in the driveway. She'd been expecting him, had prepared for this conversation all afternoon. She opened a bottle of wine. Not an expensive one they'd shared in happier times, but a simple bottle she'd bought for herself, and waited. David didn't knock. He still had his key, and he used it, walking into the house with the confidence of a man who still believed he held all the power. Emily, his voice echoed through the house. She found him in the living room, pacing the same path he'd worn 2 days earlier when he'd announced his intention to leave. But his demeanor was completely different now. Gone was the cold confidence, replaced by confusion and barely controlled panic. Sit down, David. I'm not sitting down until you explain what the hell you think you're doing. His face was flushed, his perfect hair disheveled. $361,000, Emily? Are you out of your mind? I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. Half of everything. This is insane. I never agreed to take on your business debt. Emily's voice remained calm, steady. It's not my business debt, David. It's our marital debt. Every dollar was spent to maintain the lifestyle you expected while your income couldn't support it. My income? David's voice cracked. Emily, I've been working my ass off. No. The word cut through his protest like a blade. You've been coasting. For 2 years, I've been covering your car payments, your clothing, your entertainment, your half of our mortgage when your big cases didn't materialize. I've been drowning in debt to keep you comfortable, and you never once asked how we could afford it. David stared at her, speechless. The home equity line of credit that paid for your office renovation? That's marital debt. The credit cards that covered your business dinners while you were courting Tom Henderson's wife? Marital debt. The loan I took against my business to pay for our anniversary trip to Europe? Marital debt. How did you know about... David caught himself, but it was too late. About Linda Henderson? Please, David. You're not as clever as you think you are. Emily took a sip of her wine. The question is, how long has it been going on? David slumped onto the sofa, his face in his hands. Emily, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. The only question is whether it started before or after you decided our marriage was over. When David looked up, his eyes were different, vulnerable, in a way she hadn't seen in years. It started 6 months ago. But Emily, the marriage was already over. We both knew it. No, David, you knew it. I was still fighting for us. Emily set down her wine glass. But you're right about one thing. It is over now. Emily, we can work this out. The debt thing. We can figure something else out. Maybe, I don't need half of everything. Maybe we can... No. Emily's voice was firm. You asked for half of everything, and that's what you're getting. In 2 years, I gave you my savings, my business stability, my peace of mind, and finally my marriage. I'm not giving you my integrity, too. David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was small. I didn't know, Emily. I swear I didn't know about the debt. You didn't know, because you didn't want to know. You were comfortable letting me handle the finances as long as your lifestyle didn't change. You were comfortable taking credit for our success without taking responsibility for our struggles. So what happens now? Emily looked around the living room, at the furniture she'd bought with credit, the artwork she'd charged to business cards, the whole beautiful facade she'd constructed around their failing marriage. Now you learn what I learned 2 years ago, that everything has a cost, and eventually all debts come due. That night, after David left, Emily sat in her empty house and felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not happiness, yet, but the deep satisfaction that comes from finally telling the truth. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. 3 months later, Emily stood in the conference room of Rebecca Chen's law firm, watching as David signed the final divorce decree. His hands shook slightly as he put his signature on each page, the weight of his new financial reality evident in every line of his face. The math was brutal in its simplicity. David received 50% ownership of the house, $175,000 equity, 50% of joint savings, $23,000, 50% of Emily's business assets, $31,000, 50% of all marital debt, $180,500, his net worth from the divorce, $48,000 out of $500, his monthly debt obligations, $4,200. Emily received 50% ownership of the house, $175,000 equity, 50% of joint savings, $23,000, 50% of her business assets, $31,000, 50% of all marital debt, $185,500. But Emily had something David didn't, a plan, and the business relationships to execute it. This concludes the proceedings, the mediator announced. The decree becomes final in 30 days. As they gathered their papers, David approached Emily. 3 months of financial stress had aged him visibly. His expensive suits had been replaced with off-the-rack clothing, and his confident swagger had been replaced with the hesitant gait of a man who'd learned that life could surprise him. Emily, can we talk for a minute? She looked at Rebecca, who nodded. 5 minutes. They stepped into the hallway, and for a moment, Emily saw flashes of the man she'd fallen in love with 10 years earlier. Vulnerable, uncertain, human. I wanted to apologize, David said quietly. Not for the divorce. We both know that was inevitable. But for how I handled things. For not seeing what you were doing to keep us afloat. For taking you for granted. Emily studied his face. Thank you for saying that. Are you going to be okay? Financially, I mean? The question was ironic, coming from the man who now faced bankruptcy unless he could dramatically increase his income. But Emily heard the genuine concern in his voice. I'm going to be fine, David. Better than fine. How? We're both carrying the same debt load. Emily smiled. Not with malice, but with the confidence of someone who'd spent 3 months preparing for this moment. Because I know something you never learned. The difference between assets and liabilities isn't just financial, it's strategic. David looked confused, but Emily didn't elaborate. Some lessons had to be learned through experience. That afternoon, Emily walked into the offices of Martinez Creative Solutions for the first time since the divorce proceedings began. The space looked different, smaller, more focused. She'd downsized from the prestigious downtown location to a converted loft in Lincoln Park, cutting her overhead by 60% while creating a more intimate, creative environment. Welcome. Back, boss, Janet said, grinning from behind her new desk. Ready to see what we've built? Over the past 3 months, while David had been scrambling to understand his new financial reality, Emily had been systematically rebuilding her business. She'd reached out to every client she'd had to turn away during her years of financial crisis, explaining her situation honestly and asking for another chance. The response had been overwhelming. We have 12 new clients signed for the next quarter, Janet reported. All high-value contracts, all companies we actually want to work with. Plus, 3 of your old clients called specifically to say they wanted to work with you again once you were free from distractions. Emily laughed. They said that? Direct quote from Harrison Industries. Apparently, word got around about what you were dealing with, and a lot of people were impressed with how you handled it. The real transformation, Emily realized, wasn't just financial, it was personal. For 2 years, she'd been operating from a place of fear and desperation, taking on any client who could pay, compromising her creative standards to generate quick cash. Now, freed from the pressure of maintaining David's lifestyle, she could return to the work she was truly passionate about. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Dinner tonight? I want to hear about the new Emily. Emily typed back. The new Emily can actually afford dinner. Pick somewhere good. That evening, she sat across from Sarah at a restaurant she'd avoided for months, not because she couldn't afford it, but because she'd trained herself to think in terms of scarcity rather than abundance. Okay, I have to ask, Sarah said over appetizers. How are you not drowning? You're carrying the same debt David is, but you seem liberated. Emily sipped her wine. A good bottle, not an expensive one, chosen because she enjoyed it rather than to impress anyone. Because I understand the difference between debt and investment. David sees $180,000 in obligations. I see the cost of buying my freedom. Explain. For 2 years, that debt felt crushing because I was carrying it to maintain someone else's illusion. Now it's just a business expense, the price I paid to discover who I really am when I'm not performing for someone else's approval. Sarah raised her glass. To expensive educations. To knowing what you're worth. As they toasted, Emily's phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, she considered not answering. But curiosity won. Emily? I'm sorry to bother you, but I have a question about the business assets. What about them? I'm trying to figure out how to monetize my half. Tom suggested I might be able to sell my share to a competitor or something. Emily almost laughed. David, you can't sell half of a creative business to a competitor. The value is in the relationships and reputation, not the physical assets. But the equipment? The client contracts? The equipment is worthless without the expertise to use it. And the client contracts? They're all personal services agreements tied to my specific skills and reputation. You own half of some computers and furniture. A long silence. So my half is worthless? Not worthless, but not liquid. You'd need to find someone willing to partner with me, which would require my approval, which I'm not inclined to give. Another pause. Emily, What am I supposed to do? For a moment, she felt sorry for him. David had spent 10 years assuming that success would always come easily, that his natural charm and intelligence would carry him through any challenge. He'd never had to fight for anything, the way Emily had fought to save their marriage and maintain their lifestyle. "The same thing I did for 2 years," she said gently. "Figure it out." After hanging up, Emily realized something had shifted. 3 months ago, David's panic would have triggered her own anxiety, her instinct to solve his problems even at her own expense. Tonight, she felt compassion without compulsion. She wished him well, but his struggles were no longer her responsibility. 6 months later, Emily hosted a housewarming party in her new apartment. She'd sold her half of the marital home to David, who'd immediately sold the entire property to cover his debt obligations. The irony wasn't lost on her. The house they'd both called home for 8 years had become just another asset to liquidate. But Emily's new place was everything the old house wasn't. Authentically hers. A 2-bedroom condo in Lincoln Park with exposed brick walls, hardwood floors that creaked with character, and windows that faced east to catch the morning sun. She'd furnished it slowly, deliberately, choosing pieces she loved rather than pieces that impressed visitors. "This place is so you," Sarah said, admiring the gallery wall Emily had created with her favorite client work, mixed with photographs from her travels. "It's like you've been hiding your real taste for years." Emily laughed, passing around glasses of champagne. Not expensive champagne, but the kind that tasted like celebration. "I think I was. I got so used to considering David's preferences that I forgot I had my own." The party was small but meaningful. Sarah and her partner Mark, Janet and her boyfriend Rebecca Chen, and 3 clients who had become genuine friends over the past few months. These were Emily's people. The ones who had supported her transformation from drowning woman to successful entrepreneur. "Speech!" someone called out, and Emily found herself standing in the center of her living room, looking at faces that reflected her own contentment back at her. "A year ago, I thought my life was falling apart," she began. "I was drowning in debt. My marriage was failing and I'd lost sight of who I was. But I learned something important. Sometimes what feels like destruction is actually construction. Sometimes you have to tear down what isn't working to build something that is." She raised her glass. "To the courage to ask for what you deserve, and the wisdom to know what that actually is." As her guests mingled, Emily stepped onto her small balcony and looked out over the city. Chicago glittered in the evening light, full of possibilities she was finally ready to embrace. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Emily, this is Linda Henderson, Tom's wife. I wondered if we could talk sometime. I think I'm ready to ask for my half too." Emily stared at the message, then smiled. She typed back, "I know an excellent attorney. Her name is Rebecca Chen." Some stories, Emily realized, were circular. David's affair had been the catalyst for her awakening, but it had also been the beginning of Linda's. The pattern would continue, women discovering their worth, demanding their fair share, refusing to carry the weight of other people's choices. 3 months later, Emily stood in the same conference room where her own divorce had been finalized, this time as a witness for Linda Henderson. David sat across the table, his face bearing the haunted expression of a man who'd learned too late that actions have consequences. The mathematics of Linda's case were different, but equally devastating. Linda had been a successful real estate agent before her marriage, building a thriving business that she'd gradually neglected to support Tom's legal career and raise their 2 children. Now, at 42, she was reclaiming not just her assets, but her professional identity. "I want to thank you," Linda whispered to Emily during a break in the proceedings. "I never would have had the courage to do this if I hadn't heard your story." "What story?" Emily asked. "The one about the woman who gave her husband exactly what he asked for. It's become legendary in certain circles." Emily realized that her private battle had become something larger, a cautionary tale, a source of inspiration. a reminder that fairness cuts both ways. A year after her divorce was finalized, Emily's business had tripled in size. She'd hired 2 new employees, moved to a larger office space, and been featured in Chicago Business Journal as Entrepreneur of the Year. The article's headline read, "From Debt to Dynasty: How One Woman Turned Divorce into Success." But the real measure of her transformation wasn't financial, it was personal. Emily had learned to value herself not as a supporting character in someone else's story, but as the protagonist of her own. She'd discovered that love without respect was just performance, and that sacrifice without appreciation was just martyrdom. Her phone rang as she was reviewing quarterly reports. David's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in months, she answered. "Emily, I hope it's okay that I'm calling." His voice sounded different, smaller, more reflective. "It's fine, David. How are you?" "I'm learning. I wanted to tell you that I heard about your business success, the article in the journal. I'm proud of you." Emily was surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you. I also wanted to tell you that I finally understand what you meant about assets and liabilities. Not the financial part. I figured that out when I went bankrupt. But the personal part." "What do you mean?" "I thought you were my asset. Someone who would handle the difficult parts of life so I could focus on the parts I enjoyed. But I was your liability. Someone who took without giving, who consumed without creating, who expected without appreciating." Emily was quiet for a moment. "David, we were both responsible for what our marriage became." "No, Emily. We weren't. I was responsible for taking advantage of your generosity, and you were responsible for allowing it. But those aren't equal responsibilities." After they hung up, Emily sat in her office thinking about forgiveness. Not the kind that absolves responsibility, but the kind that releases resentment. She'd spent so much energy being angry at David that she'd almost missed the gift his betrayal had given her. The opportunity to discover who she was when she stopped trying to be who he wanted. The intercom buzzed. "Emily, your 2:00 is here." "Send them in, Janet." The door opened to reveal a woman in her 30s, impeccably dressed, but with the telltale signs of stress Emily recognized from her own mirror of 2 years earlier. Too bright smile, slightly trembling hands, the careful composure of someone holding everything together through sheer will. "Ms. Martinez? I'm Jennifer Walsh. I heard about your story through a friend, and I wondered if you might have some advice." Emily gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What kind of advice?" "The kind about giving someone exactly what they ask for." Emily smiled, recognizing the fire in Jennifer's eyes, the same flame that had sustained her through her darkest months. "I have a feeling you already know what you need to do, but let's talk about how to do it strategically." As Jennifer began to tell her story, another successful woman, another failing marriage, another husband who wanted half of everything without understanding what everything actually included, Emily realized that her transformation was complete. She was no longer the woman who had sacrificed herself to maintain someone else's illusion of success. She was the woman who helped other women discover their worth and demand their fair share. Outside her office window, Chicago pulsed with energy and possibility. Somewhere in the city, other women were learning the same lesson Emily had learned, that fairness is a two-sided coin, that equality includes both assets and liabilities, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is give someone exactly what they ask for. Emily opened her laptop and began typing. Chapter 1. The day I decided to give my husband exactly what he wanted was the day I discovered what I was worth. It was time to write the book that would help other women find their balance. The debt was paid. The books were balanced. And Emily Martinez was finally completely free.